We're going to have people trailing in. Can we get started, please? Could we have a seat, please? Have a seat. Have a seat, everybody. Good evening. How's everyone? Thanks for the great crowd. People are going to keep coming in, but I want to get started. I'm Mike Ehrman. Most of you know me. There are a few. How many are new tonight? Who've never been to this meeting before? Thank you for coming. For those of you who are here already, we started a little late on memberships this year because we tried with the internet rather than a mailing and it didn't fully work. So this is not a financial plea, this is a support plea. Those of you who have not signed up as members, it's a nominal $10 for one, $15 for two. There are forms in the back. I'd like to set a record for membership this year. Please join us. Now, I always have to say this, anyone who's in the room who's not a member, you can come to all of our meetings. We're cheap that way, but we'd like you to join. The other thing we'd like you to do is to think seriously about one or both of our walking tours. And the form is back there, and they're $3 for members, $5 for non-members, the best bargain in town. We're going to do them both on Saturday mornings. May 16th, going to do the Squirrel Hill Business District, and after you're wowed by our speaker tonight, you will want to go around with him on May 16th. What we do on the speaker, you sign up, you pay, and we will cut off at 25, which we're far from now. A couple of days before, you will get a reminder from us, but the meeting for that one will be right outside the door. On June 6th, we've done the walking tour of the business district once before, but it was about 120 degrees last year, and it cut down a lot on folks, so this is our opportunity to do it again. June 6th, we're going to co-sponsor with Chatham, a tour of their wonderful campus. Chatham will actually run the tour. I don't yet have a meeting place. Anyone who's signed up for that, we will let you know well in advance. But that's at 10 o'clock on June 6th. So both of those are good opportunities. Please consider signing up. Before I introduce the speaker, I want to share a Pittsburgh story with you. I was gone last month, as I've been a few times recently, and we were in Southeast Asia on a holiday, and it was the fourth day of the trip, and we were out and took a boat ride on this glorious. It's called Halong Bay. It used to be called Tonkin Bay. You remember the Tonkin Bay River? It's one of the prettiest places in the world. They have these limestone, sandstone islands all dotted through, and there are a lot of boat tours. So we're on this boat, and there's 16 people on the boat, and we took a tender to a little island to go up to a temple on the top to look. And I was out on the tender, and there were 4 of us on the boat, and I do this. I asked someone on the boat, where are you from? Sewickley. So not only were they from Sewickley, but this was John Oliver, who was for 30 years head of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy of the Oliver family, and his wife was on the board of, who was a teacher, was on the board of History and Landmarks. So it was just a wonderful time, and out of 16 people on this boat, 4 were from Pittsburgh. So we felt pretty powerful that day. I'm going to ask Ralph Munn, who knows our speaker, I know our speaker, but he knows him much better, to come up and introduce our speaker. Oh, one more thing. I forgot. I'm sorry, Ralph, I almost forgot. We are considering something. How many of you have done walking tours before with us or with other people? How many of you think it's worthwhile to have some kind of speaker system in which you hear in your ear what the guide is saying? Do you think that that's a worthwhile addition to our, we have the money to do it, to our store? How many here would like that? Yeah?
It's excellent, especially if you're going to could have as many as 20 or
Depends on how many people.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we have some numbers problems we're working out, but we wanted to get some reaction before we dive in. But we're thinking very seriously of doing that because we seem to be doing a couple of walking tours each season. So, okay, thank you for that. Ralph?
Now, as they do this in the Drew Line, I'm the guy that gets to introduce Jim Rich. And that's a lovely thing to do. Jim's my neighbor on Marlborough Avenue, across the street. And he's a good Democrat. We enjoy each other. Ralph? Jim has got over post derangement syndrome, you know. So he recovered pretty nicely. But anyway, more importantly, Jim knows Squirrel Hill, the business end, like very few others do. We've had a couple of business folks talk to us, Joel Siegel, the pizza guys down there, and Minios. But we haven't had Jim Rich. He's retired, and I think he can give us a piece of history, relatively modern, well, mid-60s on. But I think it's a pretty important time in Squirrel Hill's life. Jim, come up and do it, and we apologize for the lecture. But this, what we have to do is they can do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Mike's story reminded me, I always say that if I was cheating on my wife in the deepest part of the Congo, somebody would come up to me and say, "Hey Jim, how are things at Fords and Murray?" You always find Pittsburgh is Mike. There you go. Yeah, Ralph is, you're always looking for one Republican. Well, on my street we have Ralph and everybody else. And so you always see the wrong signs on the, but we put up with Ralph anyway. People say I know something. When I'm in this room and I look around and I see some of my old friends and colleagues, you probably know a whole lot more about a lot of things than I do. In fact, I'm glad to see that Berkowitz is here, and Rick Conley, who fought the battles of the retailing with me over almost the same period of time. And anytime I left out something or you want to add something, feel free, because I don't claim to be the last person. In fact, these are personal recollections that I have since I bought my business in 1966. As a matter of fact, I took it over on April 17th, which is kind of about now. So you have an idea that it would have been my anniversary. I thought I would start with a little bit of background about myself. I did go to Alderdice, and my father had a men's clothing store in East Liberty on Highland Avenue, North Highland Avenue. And from the age of 13 on, I would take the street after school. School let out at 3:05. All you Alderdice grads know that. And I went immediately down in front of Poleyes and caught the 60 streetcar, which left me off at Penn and Highland, and I walked down and I worked with my father until 6, and we closed the store and we went home, and that was every day and Saturdays as well. So I had a little bit of grounding. I don't know whether that's worth much, but I had a lot of grounding in the men's clothing business. After I went to college, away from Pittsburgh and grad school, I worked in New York for a men's clothing manufacturer. But I had that fire in my belly. I never liked to work for anybody else. And I had that fire in my belly that I had to be for myself. And so I told my dad that I would like to purchase a store in Pittsburgh, which he was very happy about, but we wouldn't, not to be under the same roof with him. We were too strong under the same roof. If you know anything about fathers and sons, we were the typical. And so I bought Frank Menswear over here, which was at 5820, which is now where Contemporary Concepts is, across from Baskin Robbins. And I had my store, and I owned the whole thing, and he had his in East Liberty. And we got along famously wonderful, because I would ask him how to do things, because he was really grounded, and he was glad to tell me, and then, but I didn't have to take it, you know what I mean? I had my own place. And the tragedy of it was that 6 months later he died. He died in October of '66. And so I began to, had to run that store and this store. And it was at the time that the East Liberty Renaissance was just getting underway. And my father was one of the authors of that. He was big on working with East Liberty to get it modernized. And one of the reasons that they wanted to do something down there was that they knew the shopping centers were coming, and the parking situation in East Liberty was awful, and among other things. And they wanted to do something to increase the attractiveness of customers to keep coming to East Liberty, which at one time was, as I recall, one of the second largest suburban shopping centers in the country. So it was really a going place, and I remember in the 40s when you could almost not walk down the sidewalk. It was so crowded down there. And so I kind of inherited not only the business, but the whole urban renewal of East Liberty. And of course, we got a lot of money from the federal government, and they decided to do some things in East Liberty, and they urban renewal people planned the whole thing with the circle and all that, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And they proceeded to pretty much take East Liberty out of business. They tried a pedestrian mall, if you remember, that was the plan. And at the very last minute, somebody got the bright idea, what happens if there's a fire at the corner of Penn and Highland? How are we going to get fire equipment into the interior of East Liberty? And then, of course, it was a pedestrian mall, which wasn't a pedestrian mall, and the circle confused people, and the next thing you know, I mean, I could write a thesis on that, and the next thing we were out of business. But I was in on quite a number of the meetings at the Chamber of Commerce and the Urban Renewal, and you say, well, what did it have to do with Squirrel Hill? Well, I'll try to tie that in as we go along. When I got here in 1966, April, I had three pretty strong competitors right in the area. One was called the Coach House, which was directly across the street where Radio Shack is now. One was called Marvin's, which is where there's a bike store right next to Little's. And around the corner where the bookstore is, Barnes & Noble's, was Friedman's. And I see people, yes, that's exactly who my competitors were. They were pretty formidable. Marvin was on the way out. He was a great merchandiser. He had some other passions that drained some of his capital, and he went out, and I was faced right away with what we call the GOB in the business, which is a going out of business sale. Now, a legitimate going out of business sale is one where you just sell out the stuff that you have in your store, and that's the end of it. But that's not the way it really works. They bring in what we call the thieves, and they bring in a ton of merchandise and sew in the label of the store that they're running out of business. And they take a lot of less than desirable stuff, and they purport it to be the stores, and they work off that image, and then they're gone in 3 months, and if you don't like the product, well, you know, you bought it, and that's the end of it. They're gone. And so those are pretty powerful, and it was pretty hard to compete. But things started to go well pretty soon, and we had a lot of other stores, and I just thought I would tell you that we had two shoe stores. We had Little's and Florsheim, and there was additionally a kids' shoe store, which I can't remember the name of. Buster Brown. I think it was two then. It was Buster Brown and another one. We had two children's stores. We had TikTok Jerry Block, which is small, and we had Newman's, which had about 6,000 square feet and a full basement. That was a major operation. That was founded and owned by Dave Newman, who was a wonderful man. And he then had opened up 2 more stores. And we had an economist by the name of Reuben Schlesinger, who many of you know, who was an economist at Pitt. And every year he would come in and speak to the Merchants Council. And he said, when you open your second store, you divide yourself in half, And when you open up your third store, you invite your bookkeeper to become your partner. And that's exactly what happened to Dave Newman. His bookkeeper became a major partner, unbeknownst to him, and he had to give it up, and his nephew took it over, Dickie London. Dickie London was running it when I was there. Dave was an employee. But Dave was so big in the children's business in his day that I understand that when there was a children's show at the William Penn, somebody was stationed in the lobby looking out for Dave Newman, because when Dave Newman walked in, the word got out, Dave Newman's in the building, and that means don't take your lunch break, because he may come by and give you a big order. We had 8 ladies stores. The dressier ones were, all you know, were Litton's, Adele's, and Grace Miles. Then we had the Tweed Shop, which was owned by Joe Miles. You might remember him. He was a very smart guy. He began to open up other stores throughout the area. And he sold out at that time for $1 million. Boy, that was a lot of money to a little retailer. And he told me one day, he said, I have my million, that's what I set out to do, and I'm out of here. And he ended up in Cape Cod somewhere. And I've never seen him since. I don't know. We had a ladies' store for the more mature women called Florence Shear. And we had other stores that were kind of like sportswear stores. Mr. Mart, which was owned by Marty Sapper, and Simon Says, owned by Stanley Simon. And they were kind of interesting guys. I enjoyed knowing them because they went head to head, you know, merchandise-wise. They were fierce competitors, but they were pals. And so every time you went up the street, you'd see them having a cup of coffee somewhere. And I'll just give you a little anecdote, absolutely nothing to do with Squirrel, but I worked for a company called Eco, which was founded by a man by the name of Ben Goldman. He founded it in 1919, and he was on one floor of 79 Fifth Avenue manufacturing his merchandise, which was Eagle clothes. And he went head to head with a guy called Izzy Grossman, who, some of you old timers might remember, Groshire Clothes or Austin Lee. He went by both labels. And they went at it, you know. But in the meantime, they played gin rummy when nobody was looking. Ben Goldman, when the clothing manufacturers all moved from lower Manhattan up to 6th Avenue, the Sperry Rand building, Ben Goldman, unbeknownst to Z. Grossman, went up and signed a lease for himself along this wall, and he signed a lease for Izzy Grossman along this wall so that their back doors would meet, and they could play gin rummy. And that's a very true story. Arthur Moser had an upscale furniture and interior design store. It actually started where the Radio Shack is now. I don't know if you know that. And he bought the building, the larger building up the street. Arthur was a refugee from Nazi Germany who was sponsored by the Kaufmans. I think they were related to him in some way. He had a falling out with them, and after the war, they were developing Penn Hills. And they had all these new houses going in Penn Hills. And Arthur, during the day, would go up to Penn Hills and sell the people draperies. And at night, he and his wife, he had a little place in Wilkinsburg, he and his wife would go home and sew the draperies, and that's how he got started up in the Penn Hills area as that was being built. We had no fewer than 5 commercial banks. We had PNC, Mellon, Union, Western Pennsylvania National Bank, and Commercial Bank. Commercial was on Murray. It was owned by the Halperns, if you remember that bank. And we had 3 or 4 savings loans. We had Franklin Federal, Guarantee, Dollar, and later Parkville. I was located in the store room between Dollar and Franklin Federal, and I had an uncle who was kind of funny, and he said that my assets were between 100 and 200 million. We had no jewelry stores. One little store, but the man really specialized in scrimshaw. Remember him? Yeah. There was a rumor around here that since we had a lot of Jewish customers, Jewish people didn't pay retail for jewelry. Everybody had a cousin in the Clark building, and so jewelry stores were afraid to come up here. except now we have Oars and 3 or 4 others, so I guess that's no longer the case. We had a very high-quality gift store called the Hostess House, and they did a big job. We had at least 5 or 6 hairdressing salons. Hairdressing is a big thing here in Squirrel Hill. I don't know if they did nails in those days, but I know that's big these days. There were 2 drugstores, Rosen's and Sun. Sun was here where the Cold Stone Creamery is, and Rosen's was with Holly. When Rosen's opened in around the early 50s, that was the last word in drugstores. It was a fabulous place. And Meyer Rosen owned it, and he also had a counter there for luncheonette, yeah, right. Weinstein's was just on its last legs in 1966. We had another deli, which I think by that time was called Is Cohen's, down where Kazansky's is now. And you could get a chicken sandwich at George Aiken's, and there was a little lunch counter, if you remember, next to what I call the Union Bank there. I don't know what the incarnation, I don't know what, is it National City or National City? It was right in there where that little gift store is. The man had a lunch counter. Nobody remembers it, right? And the only real restaurant we had at that time was Sirloin. Remember Sirloin was in the middle? He had a monopoly. That guy had a monopoly. He really did well. I mean, everybody had to have lunch there practically. And at night he had a steak. That's right.
What about Bubbles and Sherman?
Well, he took over from Bubbles and Sherman. Maybe he was Bubbles and Sherman.
I'm sure he came later.
See that?
I'm sure he can't get away with anything.
You're right, he was Bubbles and Sherman. Interspersed among all those were tailor and cleaning shops, Baskin & Robbins, a hardware store, a couple of opticians, a busy lingerie shop. That's right, we did have Eisner.
Yeah.
Blocks, the lingerie store, which was a very busy place. You couldn't get in there the day before Mother's Day, if you remember. Blocks was a very active place. Sarah Jane Off, she came a little later. I do think she did come a little later.
Waldorf.
I Waldorf Bakery, but it wasn't a restaurant. Right. But we had a state store. We had a Pontiac showroom. You know, Constantine.
Is that down at the bottom by Forbes?
No, it was at Forbes and Shady.
Oh, Forbes and Shady.
Yeah. It's now the Forbes Shady Plaza, which I eventually purchased from him and chalked up in the stores and called it Forbes Shady Plaza.
Oh, is that where the
That's I
dealer
moved.
was one time?
Right.
What was Canaan Chevrolet?
Canaan Chevrolet was on this side of the street. Actually, if you really want to know about the Pontiac dealership, Constantine, they started in Oliver Flowers location. Now, I'm not taking anything away with the size of your place, but how do you ever get any cars in there? I don't know.
3 cars.
We got 3 cars in there? We had 4 single-screen movies. Anybody name them?
Gil?
The Guild,
Manor,
Forum.
Forum, and the Squirrel Hill. That's right.
What was the Forum?
That's right. We had 5 gas stations. 5 gas stations. According to Forbes and Shady, there were 3. There was a Texaco, an Exxon, and a Narco. There was Golf, Forbes and Murray. There was Sunoco, and my friend over here just reminded me there was an Amoco across, but I think by '66 it was gone across Bartlett. But there were at least 5 gas
How many
stations.
down by, was there a couple down on Murray by,
There might have been, but I'm not going down that far.
oh, you're not Murray by Darlington or somewhere?
Yeah, right.
Or down that direction?
And there were several dentists, 3 pediatricians, 2 general practitioners, several podiatrists, and a chiropractor. Dr. Gibson was the chiropractor. Now, of all those businesses I just mentioned, I'll read off to you the ones that I think are still around. There may be some others, but here are the ones that are still here. Little's,
Right.
Baskin Robbins, the Squirrel Cage, that's another restaurant I forgot, the Squirrel Cage, you know, the bar.
Yeah.
It's got a longevity. The newsstand, in fact, there's 2, the other newsstand was there too. The State Store, remember the State Store was on Forbes?
Yeah.
You mean the newsstand down near Hobart?
Yeah,
Okay.
right, it was
Eddie's and then some of the other folks.
whatever incarnation, well, yeah, but it was
Mark, yeah.
there. The Manor Theater, Dollar Bank, PNC Bank, Oliver Flower. Oliver Flower started in 1923, is that what?
The predecessor, yeah, the family
Yeah.
started, it's 85 years this year.
Yeah. Rick is third generation. His great uncle started it, right? And then his dad took over from him, and then
85 years this year.
85 years. Now that's longevity. I don't know anybody that's longer than that. And the other flower store, Squirrel Hill Flower Store, was in existence in '66. Pinskers was there, the Forward Lanes, and the Squirrel Hill Theater.
Big lanes too?
But they're not here now.
No. Oh, I'm sorry, that's
Right.
right.
Okay. The Squirrel Hill Merchants Council defined what we call the street. And I'll refer to it as the street from now on because it's the way we talk about it. Was started at Forbes and Shady, came down to Murray, and went down to Darlington, except we always included the Mellon Bank because when we had to raise money, we had to get their money. So we went to the Mellon Bank, am I right, Rick? Okay. And below the Mellon Bank in those days was another image. I mean, it wasn't the Lintons, Adele's, type of image, fashion image that we were looking for. Our image was medium to high price, very pleasant and safe surroundings, superb service. That was a big thing. In fact, at Linton's and Adele's, the customer went into a dressing room and the sales people brought the clothing to them. They didn't do it any other way. We included free gift wrapping. We had knowledgeable, solicitous salespeople who waited on each customer. And with owners, and we prided ourselves on this, we were almost all independently owned. And the owner was almost always on the premises, so that if a customer had a problem, they would go right to the owner, which is, right to the top, so to speak.
Today, not today probably.
You would get satisfaction that way. And if you didn't get satisfaction, of course, you just didn't go back. The basic premise in those days, in '66, at least in men's clothing, was that you purchased merchandise in the market, the nicest that you could for your own particular clientele. You marked it up a reasonable amount, and you never got away with anything. Everybody got the same price, which I'll talk about. I mean, if you were 50 cents off on a product, or you never heard the rest of it. That's why retailing was such an honest business. You couldn't get away with it, especially at Squirrel Hill. And people paid the price on the ticket. There wasn't this. People knew to come in. It was $100. You paid $100. It was really no argument about it. And for that, in my store, you got free alterations, which cost me 10%, which nobody ever realized, but it cost 10% to alter. You got free gift wrapping. You got all you could. If you gained or lost weight, you brought the suit back. We let it out or we took it in, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the season, which was post-Christmas and post-4th of July usually, you marked your goods down 20%, and you sold another 80% then. And then at Washington's birthday or at the very end of the summer, you kind of really got rid of whatever was left. And you went back in the market and you bought for the next season. And that's pretty much, and that's how the price structure and everything allowed you to give the service. Salesman for every customer, every salesman was on commission. So, there was overhead built into this kind of a pricing structure. And you really got to know your customers. That was another essential point. You got to know their feelings. I had 5 salesmen, and we had different personalities among them, and certain customers wanted Irv to wait on them, or Milt to wait on them, or Eddie to wait on them. And it was important that the right salesman be there when the right customer came in. And we didn't do business by appointment. We tried it. It never worked. So people came in whenever they felt like it, and hopefully the right salesman was there to take care of the customer. In those days, we had what we call fair trade laws. Some of you may be familiar with it. So, for example, if I had, let's say, jockey underwear, a package of jockey underwear, it came in pre-ticketed from the manufacturer. So if it was $8.95 for 3 briefs, it was $8.95. And Kaufman's got $8.95, and Horn's got $8.95, and Rich Frank got $8.95. And there was no variation, and the law was put in to protect the little business person against the biggies. And in about 1970, 75, something like that, they did away with the fair trade laws, and the big age of consumerism came in. So the consumer should get the best deal, and the heck with the little retailer. And so that changed a lot of things as time went on. Most of the retailers in Squirrel Hill were open 6 days a week, not on Sunday. And we were open Tuesday and Thursday nights. That is to say, the vast majority of us were open Tuesday and Thursday. And in 66, 67, 68, those eras, Tuesdays and Thursdays were really strong business nights. That was pre-Monroeville Mall. And then Monroeville Mall opened in 69, and it didn't happen immediately, but you began to see a drop-off, because what happened was that they were open every night, so the consumer could say, well, if I don't want to shop on Tuesday and Thursday, I'll shop on Wednesday or Monday or whatever. And that began to dilute some of the business. We had a merchants council, as I mentioned before. And its purpose is to decide on hours to keep open, which I just mentioned, how to handle parking problems. Parking is always a big bugaboo. I'll talk about that in a minute. But we never have had enough parking or anything. Joint advertising, particularly during Christmas and for sales. Street beautification, and for protection against shoplifting or worse. I became, when I came up here, Marvin Joseph, who headed the Coach House at that time, was located here. They had, I think, 3 stores at that point. One was in Beaver Falls, downtown here. Marvin loved this. The other ones were called Kings, by the way. And he bought, this was more of a traditional store. He liked that. And he was up here. And he was president of the Merchants Council. And he was a very organized guy. And he had no hesitation in telling people he didn't like the way they trimmed their windows, or how they, he kind of got away with it. But at that point, soon after I got here, he and his brother decided that they wanted to become a chain. And they were going to open up in all the malls. And so he went downtown and he said to me, you should be the president of the Merchants Council. Now, nobody ran for president of the Merchants Council. I mean, nobody, it was not a coveted position. And so you kind of acceded to becoming president of the Merchants Council. But I felt that with my experience in East Liberty and whatever, and the other part that I felt about was I was making my stand here, business-wise, and I wanted to make sure that Squirrel Hill was as strong as it possibly could be, and I was one of the few, except my compadre over here, who were kind of interested in all that. And so I became the president of the Merchants Council. That was my first term, first of many, I should say. One of the major differences, as you might well imagine, between having a store in a shopping center and having a store here is that in the shopping center you sign a lease, and part of the lease is you will stay open 6 nights a week, and you will stay open Sundays from such and such a time to such and such a time. And you will pay common area maintenance, which means cleaning the place. And that's all in there. And here you sign a lease, and nothing's in there. And so, and you don't become an independent retailer unless you really want to be independent. You don't want to worry. You don't want anybody else telling you what to do. So becoming the president of a bunch of independently minded retailers is something of a challenge. Some people call it herding cats. And so we had our challenges. People don't want to. They can be fine and paying their dues, and then they have a lousy day, and they say, "Well, I'm not going to belong. It's the easiest thing to do. I'm not going to belong to the Merchants Council." So while most stores were open to 9 on Tuesday and Thursday, some refused to open. And one of the most important things is that you mean a consistency. So consumers have a confidence that if they're coming to place to shop, that all the stores are open, so that if they want to buy menswear and they don't see something they like in store A, they can go to store B, and so they all have to be open. And it's a weakness if they're not all open. And of course, almost everybody was open on Tuesday, Thursday. Where we had our major problems was the so-called holiday season between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Because some people wanted to stay open every night, and some people refused, and we presented, I think, a pretty confused picture to the consuming public on that. And we never overcame it. Those who wouldn't, just didn't, and those who did, and it was weaker than it should have been. And of course, we never had quite the amount of money. It's hard to not be open on Monday, Wednesday, Friday for, say, 48 weeks, and then all of a sudden try to explain to people that for these 4 we will be open. It takes a lot of money to educate that. Very difficult. We tried to advertise jointly. We had a budget for advertising, but we tried to get more going. We hired various advisors. One was kind of funny. He came up with some commercials, and he had them recorded, and we put them on the air for a while. And it says, "Oh, Squirrel Hill." I said, "Oh, are you on the level?" You know. That's fun. It didn't get over to the public. We had people who, advertising is very subjective. And so one person wanted to have a very British sounding, snobby person talk about Squirrel Hill, and other people didn't, and some people wanted to be on the radio, and some people wanted to be in the newspaper, etc. Probably the most successful advertising we did was when we had what we called donuts. And the donut meant that we would have like a generic Squirrel Hill commercial, we're wonderful and all that, and then for about 20 seconds, a particular store could advertise its store, and then it paid for that, and then it came back with the Squirrel Hill. But it was hard to keep people together on it. And of course, we always had a shortage of parking. One of the arguments that I never won, I can tell you this, was that, for example, behind Baskin and Robbins, there are about 20 parking places. I don't know if you know that or not, but there are. And in 1966, I can tell you that building that houses the Bangkok balcony right next to Little's and underneath didn't exist. And there was a little parking lot there, and they had 12 spaces ostensibly for Little's. And but if you continue down that path, there was a pretty large parking lot behind the stores over there. And my argument was that that should be for customers. That the retailers and the others should not park there, and they should park hither and yon and save that for customers. But the others felt that they had a divine right to park their cars there, and so I never won that argument. I will tell you that when I developed the Forbes Shady Plaza, we had 20 spaces. No employee was permitted ever to park in that lot. It was strictly for customers, and that we policed pretty regularly. In my first term as president, 1970, they built the Squirrel Hill Library. You're all familiar with it. And they came up, and the same crew from East Liberty, John Morrow, and his people came up and told us we're going to build the Squirrel Hill Library, and we're going to give you 2 layers of parking. 2 layers of parking. A lot of people don't know that. And boy, did that sound good to us. And at the very last minute, when they're all, really at the 11th hour, they said the Flaherty administration was in, and Flaherty's had a brilliant idea at the last minute that the so-called have communities like us had to kick in money to help defray the cost of the parking lot. And they said, and your share of this lot is $90,000, which, you don't have $90,000 in those days. You have to go door to door with a handout. it's pretty hard to do. But we attempted to do it. In the meantime, at the very last minute, this is the great planning department of the city of Pittsburgh, they did what they call a core drilling on the ground underneath the library. And to their chagrin, they discovered that under the library is pure rock. And they told me that it cost 10 times the amount to excavate rock as it does dirt. And that knocked the second floor out of the box. But they also forgave us our $90,000. So we got the 72 spots for nothing. Meantime, I began to realize that going down to City Hall to try to get things like police protection or whatever was very difficult. We were, as I say, a have community, and they felt we should be able to take care of ourselves. And so we decided we needed an advocate, a professional advocate on our side. And there was one fellow downtown who was a very fine gentleman and a very powerful guy, so we thought, Phil Baskin. So we tripped down to Phil's office. He had a very large law firm called Baskin, Borman, Sachs, Holland, and Craig. And we said, Phil, would you represent us? And you'll be able to unlock doors that we can't. He had been a city councilman. He knew where all the bones were buried. And he did. He took us on for $25 a month. $25 a month, which we thought was pretty hefty, I had to tell you. We paid it. And just as we made this agreement to do this, Phil had a big falling out with the Flaherty administration. I mean, they hated each other. So it wasn't even that Phil was neutral. Anything he said, they just dismissed out of hand. So he called me one day and he said, I can't do it anymore for you because they don't like me. He says, so I'm going to give it to my associate who was about 12 offices down the road. And I said, Phil, I don't need Mr. 12 offices down the road. I bought you. And so that ended that. And then a good thing happened in 1972, and that is that they founded the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition. And the first executive director of the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition was a very fine gentleman by the name of Richard Cohen. And the first president was Eddie Grinberg, and I could see that was a good thing for us as retailers as well, because when we wanted more parking or better lighting or whatever, we went down as grubby profiteers, When the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition was behind it, it was now the community. And boy, that had a better sounding. And there were a lot of people there who had a lot of contacts. The first thing that helped us, very interesting, helped us down there was another fella who was on the board with us by the name of Ted Guthrie. I don't know if any of you remember Ted Guthrie. Ted Guthrie, by the way, for all you history buffs, his real name was Armistead. Armistead Guthrie. He lived on Solway Street. And he was what they call, and he let you know, he was an FFV. You know what an FFV is? First family of Virginia. So he probably went back to 1600. And if you remember, General Lee, Robert E. Lee, had about 3 or 4 generals that were his main guys. And one was Stonewall Jackson, and one was James Longstreet, and probably a guy called Johnson, and General Armistead. And Armistead was his great-grandfather or uncle or something like that. And, so that was Ted. He had independent, he was a man of independent means. He ran the Pennsylvania Economy League for a while. And he was very active in the coalition. And one of the meetings, he said, we have a lot of litter up here in Squirrel Hill. If you remember in those days, I'm sure you do, there were a lot of cigarette butts around, a lot more people smoked than they do now. And so he said, I think what we ought to do, he says, is get somebody with a machine, like a huge vacuum cleaner, going up and down the street and clean up, because, you know, some of the retailers did and some didn't. And the winds up here are terrific, so sometimes you can sweep, and then the next thing you know, it's loaded with debris. So I was skeptical that we could get it done, but he persevered, and we got enough people that we were able to pay a person, and they bought this big machine. Some of you might remember it had like a big vacuum bag. And for a few years, this guy would walk up and down the street and clean up the street, and the street was a lot cleaner. And Guthrie kind of pointed out that it could be done, and it was. In '75, the city, I think, got some more money, and they decided to refurbish our street. And ostensibly what they wanted to do was replace the sewer line, the storm sewer line that goes down the length east and west along Ford's Avenue, because the one they had in there was too small. And when we got any kind of a rainstorm, the stores, the basements would flood, a lot of the stores along Ford's Avenue. And another thing they want to do was take all those electrical wires and put them underground. And they wanted to narrow the roadbed, because we had another thing up here that some of you would remember called double parking. And people hated double parking, except when they had to run into the state store for a bottle, by God, you know, it was bad for others. But when I have to do it, it's all right. And so they wanted to get rid of double parking. They wanted to widen the sidewalks, which of course narrowing the roadbed would do. And they wanted to beautify the street. And because of what I'd gone through in East Liberty, I wasn't president exactly. I'd given it up. I said, whoops, I'm going back in. And I did. And a couple things. One, I didn't want them tinkering with the traffic patterns and the parking patterns that we already had. I saw what an upheaval that did to the East Liberty shopping district, and I don't want any theoreticians. I have nothing against John Moore. He was a wonderful guy, but he kind of messed up East Liberty, and then he got the job as the urban planner of San Jose, California, and he flew off to San Jose and left all of us with the mess that was there. So, so the other thing that I thought would be a good idea, and everybody went along with me, was that we hired our own architect, our own planner, and his name was George Anderson. I don't know if you knew George Anderson or not, but he was a professor of architecture at Carnegie Mellon, and he had an office on Shady Avenue, and it was down from your old house, Mel. And if you remember that they made a movie called Hitsville about Motown. It was supposed to be Detroit, but they really did it in Pittsburgh, and it was his house that they dummied up to look like the headquarters of what was that guy's name?
Gordy.
Gordy, yeah. His headquarters. It was his house. And he worked out of that house. You could look into the windows, and he had those lights that architects use in those desks. And George Anderson knew Squirrel Hill, and he knew what we wanted. And actually what he did do, before the urban renewal had a chance to tell us what they were going to do, he drew up the plan. And we presented the plan to the city, rather than they, which included all the, I don't have a copy of it, but I can see it in my mind's eye, with all the trees placed and all that type of thing, and the sidewalks, and there was a kind of a design in the sidewalk, and part of it was red, and where the crosswalk, like there's a crosswalk right by Little's there that goes across. All that was done by George Anderson, and the city pretty much bought into it, and it was. I think it worked out pretty well. The only thing I'm still angry at myself about is that they came to us and they said that for another $10,000 they could put a electrical outlet under each tree. And all you had to do was plug in if you wanted to light the trees, or you wanted to have some kind of a thing where you wanted to cook, you know, and you needed electrical power. And the $10,000 was too much for me to swallow. And we didn't do it, and we should have. It would have been a very good investment to have. I'm sorry we By that time, Dick Caligiuri was the mayor. You remember all the machinations where Flaherty went into the Justice Department, and Dick talked his way into becoming the president of the city council. Lou Mason was the president. He was ill, and Dick said, how about resigning and I'll become president? And then he told Forrester that he would only run in the primary. Remember that? He wouldn't run in the primary, that he wouldn't run in the primary. And anybody knows anything about politics in this town knows that whatever Democrat wins the primary becomes the mayor automatically. And so Forrester won the primary, and Dick was the mayor, and if you recall, we had a terrible winter, 76, 77, we had enormous potholes. And Dick got in there with his pal Dave Matter, who was one of the most brilliant guys you'll ever know. And I don't even know if you know this, but Dave Matter was Bill Clinton's roommate at Georgetown. And he was Bill Clinton's campaign manager when he ran for presidency of the student body at Georgetown. And so Dave Matter was like Mr. Inside. He got things done, and Dick was the great outside. And between the two, they paved 90 miles of road, and after the primary, which Forrester won, Dick knew that he would, that people really liked him, and he formed a party called Pittsburghers for Caligiuri, and he beat Forrester in the fall. And after that, they passed a law that you can't create a new party after the primary. Dick, the beauty about, not only was Dick a great guy, but he lived in Squirrel Hill. He went to Alderness. He knew Squirrel Hill. It's wonderful when you have a mayor who knows the area versus these guys from the north side. They have heard about Squirrel Hill at one time or another. I mean, you can imagine with Bobby O'Connor sitting here every night in front of the coffee tree, what things might have been. But anyway, that's beside the point. So they decided we worked hand in glove with the city and helped plan, not only plan the whole project, but the timing of it. So we wanted the street torn up in July, because that's pretty much the weakest month, retail month. And they complied with it. And they brought up a contractor called J-Jack, who was run by the Diolis brothers. And prior to this job, the Diolis brothers, J-Jack, had just completed doing Wilkins Avenue. That was their project. They finished that. And they tore up the street, and I got to know these guys very, very well. And because I wanted to keep them moving on this project as much as I possibly could. And the city wasn't paying them for the Wilkins job. And one day, one of those Diologists came to me and he said, we're shutting this job down. The place was a shambles. It was like, I called it Venice West. If it rained, you could put gondolas out here. The whole street was just torn up. And he said, I'm shutting this job down if we don't get our money by Monday morning. So I hot-footed over to Dick Caligiuri's house. He lived on Beechwood Boulevard on Friday evening. He made 2 phone calls. I was right there. And he said, tell the boys they'll have their money Monday morning. They did, and the job continued. And that's just the way that worked. Into the 70s, and the fair trade laws were off the books. We then began to see where the pre-pricing of anything was just gone. So that if I got jockey underwear and it said $7.95 and somebody wanted to sell it for $4.90, there was no stopping if they wanted to use oscillators. And they began to use other things in my field, like London Farm raincoats as a football, et cetera, et cetera. And so began a new era of retailing, which was not the kind of retailing that we were really set up to do, although we kept going. Also, they challenged the blue laws about opening on Sunday, and of course, the blue laws went by the boards, and Sunday openings, and it came in. And independents, it was hard for an independent to stay open 7 days a week. I mean, you had to give people off. And it was hard for the retailer to be there. It was just a whole different era. And you could see that things were changing. And in addition to that, in the 80s came what they called dress down Fridays. And instead of wearing suits, I mean, if you look at pictures of baseball games from the 30s, you will see every man in a suit with a vest and a hat and a tie, right? And workmen, you know, like carpenters went to work with suits and ties and vests, and that's the way they were. And all of a sudden came dress down Fridays, which then became dress down Thursdays and Wednesdays. And clothing, you know, and you could see that, now my business actually increased every year from 66 to 89, which is a pretty good run, 23 years. But 89 was it, and that was and then it was hard to keep 89's figures, because people just didn't wear them. We didn't charge for alterations. These people came in and said, well, we'll have to charge you for alterations. And whereas with me, if the sleeve was 1/4 of an inch off, back it went for 20 minutes to the seamstress to get it fixed. When they bought it off the rack with no alteration, that's good enough, you know, it was an inch off here, that's good enough. Or my mother-in-law knows how to sew, she'll take care of it for me. And I'll save the few bucks that it was worth. So I could see that, I could see that it wasn't going to work. And I personally got lucky. Men's Warehouse came by and said they wanted to buy me, and I said, fellas, have a seat. I was happy to get out. My timing was perfect. One other thing I will tell you that, one other thing that didn't happen up here, retailing today went national. In other words, you have to have chain stores in order to have viable clothing or whatever you have. And in the 80s, Kuntz and Ryder went out of business in Shadyside. And they rented the room to Talbot's, which is obviously a national. And Talbot's went in there and did very well from the get-go. And people talk. And so the Talbot people got the word out that if you want to go to Pittsburgh and you want to be in a suburban shopping center area, and you want to open a store, go to Shadyside. And so Shadyside, so Williams Sonoma went over there, and J. Crew went over there, Banana Republic went over there, etc. And we've had 3 nationals that I know of, hit or miss, Men's Warehouse, and Radio Shack. I'm hard pressed to think of any others. Who?
Baskin Robin.
Well, okay, I'm talking about clothing now. I'm talking about, yeah, we have the cold stuff, but I'm talking about that type of, that local store. And hit and missed and hung around for a while, and they're gone. Men's Warehouse stayed 8 years in my location and took off for the waterfront. I have the satisfaction that the regional manager said that was a big mistake, that they should have stayed here, but they were gone and never to come back. But Radio Shack, I think, is pretty busy. But what I'm trying to tell you is they got the image, and we actually hired somebody who supposedly had a connection with a bunch of nationals in New York, and we never were able to, and then the other nail on that coffin was that they opened the waterfront that got a whole bunch of nationals. So the nationals then said, well, we don't have to be in Shadyside and the waterfront and Squirrel Hill. So we've never gotten. So we filled up our rooms with medical and banks and coffee shops and Asian restaurants and other restaurants. And,
Too many newsstands.
So people say to me, well, it's not the same as it used to be. Well, you know, are you wearing suits every day? You know, that type of thing. Are you? No. Why should I? I don't make my living that way. I'm gonna tell you, when I was in business, in fact, I said to my wife, I'm gonna wear a blazer and a coat. She says, why? And so, so, no, I don't. For special occasions, I have it, and that's it. And of course, the sale of men's clothing is just diminished in this country. Hart Schaffner Marks was the last of their breed, and they're in Chapter 11. You can buy a share of stock in Hart Schaffner Marks, which 30 years ago was the benchmark for clothing. They had it all going. You can buy a share for 3 cents if you feel like taking a shot at it. I wouldn't recommend it, but there it is. So that's my little recollection of what I went through. And anybody have any questions or comments?
What year did you retire?
I sold out in '94.
Well, I want to tell you that, how many years is that? 94?
15. I
15.
can tell you that.
We bought all our clothes on the President's Day sale. We're still wearing them, and they look like brand new.
That was another problem. My stuff lasted much too long.
Brand new.
I still have people come to me and I say, you know what I say
I
to
was going to
that?
wear them
My
tonight.
standard answer is that keep them, they're collector's items. You'll never get another one.
You failed to mention the great tie sale.
No.
Well, that was,
Put you on the map.
I don't know, you want to hear about my great tie sale or you don't have time?
Yes. Go.
I had a customer who was very prominent, from a very prominent family, a very, very brilliant man. He was a bridge, I played bridge, and when people get, huge master points, I really look up to this. And if I mention his name, which I've never mentioned, you would recognize it, some of you would. Anyway, he was a bachelor, and he had a thing about buying neckties. He would come into my store and buy 1, 2, 3 dozen ties at a time. And we had to put them in boxes, and at that point, and he, and whenever we got a new tie shipment and we called him, and it was like a slam dunk, he came in and bought dozens. I found out subsequently that some stores in town, when the salesman came in to sell them ties, would call him and let him pick them from the salesman himself. And then when they came in, they called him and he bought the ties. And he took the ties. So this went on for about 25 years. And one day he died. I saw it a bit. And he owed me $650 for ties. And I billed where I always bill, figuring somebody would get it. And I didn't get paid. And I billed him again, I didn't get paid. So I called up the proprietary, I think, and I said, this is the man's name, who's handling the estate? And they told me it was an attorney. And I called the attorney and I said, I have this bill, I'm not worried about it. I said, I'm sure it's there, the money's there. He said, absolutely. He said, you'll have your money right away. I said, I'd like to know what he did with all this. We never saw him wear a tie. Never. And so I said, he said, would you like to see this tie collection? I said, is there water in the ocean? I said, you better believe I want to see this tie collection. So he lived in an apartment, and 3-bedroom apartment, very nice size apartment. And Joan, my wife, and one of my associates, Mel Landing, and I went over to see this tie collection. So we walk into the place, and in the wall, in the dining room, he had built in special into the wall a double door like this. And there was a tie rack, 2 tie racks, one on this level, one on this level, and on the other door, this level and this level. 3 doors. Well, but when you open that door, there was another door behind it. And you open that up, and there were ties here and ties there. And there was a third one behind it. And it was 3 wide. Okay, you got this picture? And they were all ties hanging. Never worn. Never worn. So then he takes me into the spare bedroom. He slept in one bedroom. He had a collection of books in another bedroom, and then he went into the other bedroom, the spare bedroom. And I'm about 6 feet tall, roughly, and there were boxes of ties in that, up as high as I could, higher than I was. From the far window, it's about a 12 by 15, that's kind of a standard apartment. And it was full of ties, all boxes of ties. So I said, boy, you know, I'd make a heck of a sale of ties. And they never been worn, they were brand new. We'd mark them at a ridiculous price. So I began to negotiate with the lawyer, and I said, I think there's 3,000 ties. And he says, I think there's 5,000. I said, there's no fun, you know, we're going back and forth. I said, so I finally got the idea. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you so much a tie. We'll count the ties, I'll give you so much. And he agreed with that. So it was on the appointed day, we went down to the apartment to get the ties. One of my employees had a big van, and we were down there, and the people from Mellon Bank, they handled the estate. They were counting these ties, you know, and my employees taking them out, and not counting, whatever. And all of a sudden, they started taking out the boxes in the bedroom, and on this wall over here, which we could not see before because of all the boxes, there was another set of these covers, you know?
More ties.
They were 3 deep, and these were 4 wide instead of 3 wide.
Oh, dear.
And I called the attorney right away. I said, I didn't know they were over there. And I said, and they were the old. I said, I'm capping it, and he said, okay, because we had half of them on the way. So I called up my advertising man. I said, I got all these ties. I said, remember Jack Etzel? I thought he would be, you know, he was kind of like a kooky guy. And I thought, you know, if he would come out and put a bunch of ties around his neck and say, boy, did this guy have a tie sale, you know. And so what happened was, he sent out this 23-year-old kid, my advertising guy, and he wrote up that this was an estate sale of ties, and he said, you know, there were a whole bunch of them. And this was a Thursday, I remember very well. And about an hour, and what he did was, he would take this story, and he put it in those days in a fax machine to all the television stations, the radio stations, the newspapers, the UPS, the UPI, the AP, whatever it was. And out it went to all of these people, hoping that somebody would grab a hold of it. So about an hour later, 2 hours later, because he got it right out, I get a call, I think it was the UPI, it was either that or the AP, I can't remember. And the man from the UPI says, he says, I got this thing here. He said, it's very fast. I said, could I come out tonight and look at these ties and bring a photographer? Can you come out tonight and bring a photographer? So he did. He came out that night with a photographer. And he said, this is a great story. And he took all kinds of colored pictures of me with ties around my neck. And he said, look, he said, I tell you, if there's a huge story tomorrow, you know, like a hijacking or something, it won't show. He says, but if it's a slow news day tomorrow, he says, this will make a lot of newspapers. So next morning, I walk in the store, and literally the phone is ringing off the hook. I've never had that before. Since I got a call, my brother-in-law called me. Here I am in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, looking at my brother-in-law. My other brother-in-law called me from Baltimore. I'm in the Baltimore Sun. I'm in the all kinds of newspapers in Florida, in the McKeesport Daily News. I'm in Erie. I'm in Chicago. I'm in Canada. I'm telling you, I had about 15 minutes. And I'm getting these calls. One guy says, I'm 1,500 miles north of Toronto. And he said,
1,500 miles north?
I run the drama department in my high school, and I need ties for like guys and dolls. You got any ties for guys? Yeah, I got ties for guys. I packed them up, shipped them up there. I got a call from somebody in Edmonton. I should mention too that I was interviewed coast to coast on the CBC, on some program that everybody listens to in the evening, I suppose, in Canada. I'm big in Canada, at least for that one. And, I got a call from Edmonton that they have an art thing, a fabric art, and could I send some ties up there for their students? I'm big in that university because I have a plaque to meet, believe it or not. I got a call from somebody in Utah for cancer research, they had that type of thing, and they wanted ties. And I had a call from, believe it or not, a Professor Pheasant. And he only wore ties with pheasants on them. Were there any ties in this? And there were half a dozen ties with pheasants on them. He was up in Wilkes-Barre, and I said, and it ended up, I could go on and on, but it ended up that we're 12,000 ties. 1,000 dozen ties. And it made Charles Osgood, he has a program every day in which he called it the man with 10,000 ties. We thought it was 10 until we finally counted them. 10,000 ties. And he ended his, I have a copy of it, and he ended it, Charles Osgood only wears bow ties. And at the end of this thing, he said, and of all those ties, not one bow tie. On Saturdays, he runs it for 5 days, and on Saturday he runs the best of the week, and that was the best one, so it ran twice in Charles Osgood. It made the best 100 stories of Parade magazine.
What year was that?
So, what?
What year was that?
1993.
Oh, 93.
1993, not March.
March, the day before that big snowstorm.
Yeah, before that big snowstorm in
yeah.
March, and we had to close, we couldn't open, but we put all those ties in. So that was my big time. Huh? Oh, the last thing I will tell you is, yes, the editorial page of the Washington Post, on the left side, that's, they have the, Obama does what he didn't like about Obama, whatever it would be. And on the bottom, the man with 10,000 ties. And somebody sent it to me, I didn't see it myself.
I'm still wearing it.
It's a tie.
I tell you, all the things I've done in this world, I will always be remembered by ties. Looks is everything. Oh, if I would have had one of those every 6 months, kiddo, you wouldn't have seen them. Oh, that was a profit. Oh, great. Oh, that was Ralph did that. Did you look? I thought he wanted to.
What is that?
Yes, we can. That's great.
We know Jim's secrets. So, listen, thank you ever so much. We seem to have 35 or 40 people, whatever we do, at least, which is great. It's up 10 or 20. It's great to have you all here. Remember, walking tours and membership. Next month, Beth Rourke is coming back. She's spoken 3 times. She will also be part of the Chatham Walking Group. She has bringing prints, you can do visuals. She's doing prints and photographs of old Pittsburgh. In June, Betty Conley, Betty, are you still here? Hi, Betty. Betty needs your help. We're going to do a participatory program on the schools and record it. So bring your school memories, and if anyone has particularly strong ones, please get in touch with us to be in touch with Betty, because she may want to recruit you in advance. But we're going to try a participation. And in July, before we break for the summer, Margaret, a tea shop, is going to come and talk to us about tea and teapots, the history thereof. So we will see you the next few months. Thanks for coming, and thank you very much.